Greetings all, my name is Gigi Dixon, Executive Vice President of External Engagement at Wells Fargo and Company. It is my privilege to moderate the Committee on Economic Development's virtual workshop entitled Build Back Black, Strategies for Growing Black Wealth. Growth of Black-owned businesses is indeed another way to close the racial wealth gap in our communities, but a historical lack of focus and investment in Black founders has exacerbated the wealth gap. I'm excited about today's discussion with leaders who have made it their mission to focus resources and support to the development of Black founders and entrepreneurs. I would like to welcome these esteemed panelists to the conversation today. Sam Combs, he's the CEO and managing partner of Comstar Advisors, a management consulting and private investment firm specializing in executive level leadership, strategy, governance, and other advisory services, primarily for growing middle market companies. Welcome, Sam. Charles O'Neill, he's the chairman of the U.S. Black Chambers Incorporated, which provides committed visionary leadership and advocacy in the realization of economic empowerment and supports a network of African American chambers of commerce and business organizations in their work of developing and growing Black enterprises. And Kelsey Ruger. Kelsey is Vice President of Product of Hello Alice, a free platform designed for and by small business owners to provide guidance and support in their entrepreneurship journeys. So when we talk about economic equity and the racial wealth gap, there's often pushback from those that promote harmful rhetoric, such as the assertion that if you work hard or pull yourself up by your bootstraps, the opportunity will be there. This ignores centuries of longstanding economic inequality that has left Black communities and Black businesses underfunded and undervalued for centuries. So let's start this conversation with each of our panelists sharing a bit about themselves and what they believe to be the biggest obstacle in the growth of Black-owned firms. How about starting with Sam?
Hello, and thank you for that question, Gigi. Well, this is a long-standing issue for our people and for our Black businesses. And, you know, we've long talked about the lack in the ability to access capital. And I believe, you know, even today, that remains one of the more challenging issues that faces Black businesses in America. But it's not the only issue, and maybe not even number one. What you find if you look at the data around Black businesses is that, particularly in the female ranks, we are starting businesses at a rate that is faster than most other groups, ethnic groups in the country. And we seem to do quite well for the first 3 to maybe 5 years of that business cycle of growth. And then something happens. We're not able to, our businesses for some reason aren't able to scale and sustain. And so I think that, of course, some of that can be related to capital, but some of that also is related to talent and knowledge, ability about knowledge and ability around the creating systems or installing systems for the long-term posterity of that business. And so I think anytime we see opportunities to create these incubator, accelerator type tools or organizations, they can be a true catalyst to not only helping us to start more businesses, but helping us to sustain and elevate the growth trajectory of those businesses over time. So yes, capital remains probably the primary issue, but if you're going to get access to capital, then you've got to be able to not only grow, but sustain your business for the long haul.
That's awesome. And so what caused you to start the organization that you're running today and managing?
Well, I spent 30 years personally in corporate America and rose to the C-suite level and of a Fortune 500 company and served as president of that organization. And after I retired in my second half, rather than going back to work from someone else, I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to walk the talk. Maybe it's time for me to do something that I'd always wanted to do, and to determine if I could, in fact, take those skills that I had developed and cultivated to grow that business inside of the company. And that business ultimately was spun off into a Fortune 1000 public company that is operating now. And so to take those skills that were learned and put those to work for myself and for the next generation. And so I'm now and have been for the last 12 plus years an independent businessman. And you saw from some of my bio there that we're primarily an investment firm. I do serve on some boards, both for-profit and not-for-profit, which is another topic we can talk about, of why they are not-for-profits are so important to our community's well-being financially. But learning how to put capital to work for myself and for others, and also having those years of operating experience in a P&L business for someone else in a larger firm taught me that the thinking and the mindset of how those firms think, but you also have to develop that entrepreneurial spirit. So it's been a 12-year journey. It's going well. Yeah.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
So Charles O'Neill, tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got to the position of chairman, and what's important from your perspective.
Well, thank you, Gigi. And boy, it looks like Mr. Combs was reading off my paper about the issues that confront Black-owned businesses in our country. But I want to start off with just a little side story. Most of us are familiar with Harold Cruz and his book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, but he wrote another book and published in 1968 called Rebellion or Revolution. And deep in the middle of that book is a quote that's kind of become a guide star for me. And what what he wrote was, while it is true that ideologies move men, it is economics that feeds, clothes, and shelters them. If these ideologies are not understood in terms of economics, they're not understood at all. And so the work that we do in advocacy organizations, particularly interfacing with government agencies, corporate entities as well, is about deciphering this quagmire of public policy, all kinds of constraints on access to opportunity for Black-owned businesses. And so I have the great fortune, as you noted in the introduction, of working for two organizations, both the U.S. Black Chambers Incorporated and here in Texas, the Texas Association of African-American Chambers of Commerce, that are dedicated to unraveling this morass of regulations that have served to bar us from opportunity. And more importantly than that, but these organizations are committed to creating solutions, opening access to resources, and providing training for both Black chambers and Black businesses, Black-owned businesses. So our work as advocates for the interests of Black-owned businesses, when successful, will result in improvements in the quality of life in the communities these businesses serve, and ultimately will bridge this chasm, this abyss between Black and white wealth. I do agree wholeheartedly with Sam's assessment of access to capital prevailing as the most frequently cited reason for stymied growth for Black-owned businesses. But it made me think about something else. And Gigi, you know this, I spent about 20 years in the newspaper business. So information is critical as well. And the communicating of real strategies for how we work our way into the scalable enterprises that Mr. Combs described. And so I think it's a twofold, and I think NAACP is clearly positioned across a wide footprint across the country to help unlock our thinking about our relationship with this economy. You know, and so while it is important for business owners to be very, very, very well focused on their enterprises, those consumers that they rely on for their livelihoods have to understand that it's a symbiotic relationship and that consumers have a responsibility to the overall economy. And those are the things that we can do as advocacy organizations, because business owners can't take the time to take their eye off the ball. And so we can think of those things and have these kinds of conversations that result in positive outcomes and relay those to the business owners and the chambers that support their work.
Outstanding.
Yes,
outstanding. Thank you, Charles.
Mhm.
And so Kelsey, hello, Alice. Very exciting platform. Looking forward to hearing from you a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Hello Alice, and the work that you're doing to promote the growth of Black-owned firms.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. So my name is Kelsey Ruger, and I do work for Hello Alice, and we are a platform that does service businesses, and we like to say businesses that have been traditionally undercapitalized.
Mhm.
And we've been talking a lot about this access to capital, but one of the things that I think we've discovered working with so many small businesses, and particularly minority businesses, that is not just the access to capital, it's the access to the knowledge of what to do after you get it, how do you scale your business, and really growing it going forward. And I've been involved in the entrepreneurial community here in Texas for a long time. And what I like to tell people is, early on in my life, I had the opportunity to work with my grandfather, who was a carpenter in Savannah, Georgia, ran his own business. And at the time, as a kid, you never really understood what a business was or why he was doing certain things. But what started to crystallize to me once I got through college and I started to work with startups is the difference between what it was like for my grandfather and what I was learning that other businesses had access to. And it wasn't just money, it was the historical access to opportunities and channels and the people who could help move those businesses forward. And I think we've just now gotten to this point where we're saying it's the access to capital, but there's so many other facets to starting a business and being successful that we have to give people access to. And so that's always been my passion since I've realized that, is how do I also not only give these businesses the money they need, but tell them, hey, when you're starting your business in the first 3 months, these are 10 things that you should do, or here's how you should use your money, and really helping them to understand that once you get to certain break points in the business, there's different tactics that you might have to use. And one of the things that I like to tell everyone when they're starting to work with small businesses is that a small business is not just a little big business. They have very different ways of running. They have to use the capital in very different ways, and really helping them to unlock not just the money, but how to make that money the most productive.
That is absolutely paramount. How do you make the money productive? Another thing that I've learned over the years working with small businesses and minority and women-owned businesses is, you know, do we even ask for enough when we have the access? But that's another topic for another day, and we can talk about that ad nauseum. With that, I want to segue to the next question for this panel, and I do want each panelist to get a little bit more specific around accessing capital. So I think we've named it. Access to capital can certainly be described as the #1 challenge for businesses. especially Black founders. And that capital continues to be elusive for Black founders, especially during economic downturns like those that were caused by the recent COVID pandemic. So what are some of the specific impactful programs and practices your organizations, U.S. Black Chambers, ComStar, and Hello Alice, are driving, leading, delivering to promote access to capital and to support the development and sustainability of Black-owned businesses? Let's start with you, Charles, and we'll move to Sam, and then we'll go back to Kelsey.
Thank you, G. Well, first and foremost, we absolutely believe in training to ensure that business owners understand the responsibility that comes with our opening doors of access to capital. Number one, all of the business skills necessary to effectively deploy that capital, to be successful, to be able to scale that enterprise is way, way, way before you access the capital. And so our School of Chamber Management, our School of Chamber and Business Management is designed expressly to arm business owners with those skills necessary, prefatory skills, those skills that come before you're able to access capital. On the back channel, our relationships with organizations like the National Bankers Association, other entities, CDFIs, the Association of African American CDFI CEOs, those entities that are actively engaged in direct lending. That's not our sweet spot, but we are absolutely instrumental, we believe, in them improving their delivery channels, finding those businesses that can scale, that can be successful if given the right infusion of capital. On another note, again, the education part, the communication part, I think it's critical that if we're sincere about bridging the gap, and that is closing this chasm between white households and Black households, then the aggregation of capital, the understanding of how you assemble capital for deployment in the marketplace is absolutely critical. And one of the really learning about the economy is that if we're making investment decisions and we invest just like white investors invest, then we won't close the gap. We will simply raise our standards of living perhaps, but we won't close the gap effectively. And so we have to learn new strategies of investing. And that's the only way that we'll arrive at something approaching parity between Black households and white households, which I think is the goal of our conversation today.
Excellent. Sam? Sam, what are some specific programs that you guys have leaned into?
Well, again, as a private company, our role is more on the consulting side. We may assist some businesses with how to access customers, which is the most important part of having a business, with large corporations. And some of the consulting work or advisory work we will do with them is about them preparing to do business. Many of them have a small enterprise that is growing, and they don't understand that if you were, for example, to move to get a contract with a larger firm, and one of the first things that firm's going to want to know is if you can fulfill the promises. Can you fulfill the orders? Can you meet the standards that they are requesting that you meet? There's a myriad of things that go along with that. Also, I find with entrepreneurs that are aspirational about starting a company, I often ask them, what business do you want to be in? And it's just like picking a career field. You need to be thoughtful about that. What is sometimes they select an area that's very capital intensive when they don't have the credit nor the backing. And when we talk about access to capital, there's also this access to the friend building part of capital, not just the financial capital, the relationship capital that people have to build, that guide you to some of these things, that inform you of some of these things, that open doors for you to access the financial components or the customers that you need to grow and sustain. And so I often ask them, if they are a new entrepreneur, to really be thoughtful about what business they want to be in and understand what type of margins that business has, what is the true opportunity, the market size of that business in the territory that they want to operate in. And if they are an ongoing concern that's trying to grow and scale, then I try to understand and help them to understand what type of infrastructure they need to have internally to run a company that can meet the expectations of their customers. Do they even have surveys or follow-up type mechanisms to ensure that the work that they're doing is satisfactory, or things of this nature? Nowadays, with social media and tools that are available, you can do these things much more cost effectively than you could have before. But understanding quality work and are you meeting the customer's expectations? So we don't direct them to programs. We more, I guess you would say, help them find the knowledge that they need to grow and sustain their business.
And I think that's important. It's an important theme, what we're hearing so far, Charles, about the training, and the really specific focus on the Black businesses, and the advice. I can remember when I was managing the small business marketing years ago, and was building strategy for women and minority-owned businesses, and a lot of small businesses didn't feel they had the resources for marketing services, and they didn't feel they could afford advice. They didn't feel they could afford that. And so just giving them access to, Sam, what you're delivering, I think is very powerful and very impactful. And so now let's move to Kelsey. What specific impactful programs or policies and practices is Hello Alice engaged in?
Well, and I'll start with principles. And for me personally, I have three things I always tell the businesses that we work with when I'm advising. When I tell them, what's the model? Where's the money? What are the mechanics? And the reason I always start with the model is we get so many companies that come in and they're looking for money, but they don't actually know how they're going to make money. And it's so important for them to make sure they've established a solid business model, because it's easier to capitalize a business that's making money and you know how that money is going to come in. And then we can go point them in the right directions. And I'm glad we touched on the relationships, because one of the things that is really important to me, particularly when serving Black businesses, is the understanding that many of us come from households that didn't have the same sort of resources that other people might have had access to. And so, for example, I may have grown up with friends who had uncles or grandparents who were sitting on a lot of money that they could lend them. And so one of the things that we like to focus on with community is making sure those relationships are being built, so that not only are they getting access, but they're building that network of relationships that will help them access different levels of money. So if they're, maybe they're at their early stage and they just need seed money, And then what happens when they start to scale, and who do they go to or who do they talk to for that type of money? And then really it's the mechanics of running the business and understanding little things like where you should go to get certain technology to save money so that you're not spending money that you don't need to, or understanding about social media marketing so that you can access a customer base that maybe you wouldn't have had access to, and really tying those three things together. I think a lot of people know us for our grants, and we do give away a lot of grant money, but I think that's just foundational, and really understanding that beyond the grants, there are other, there's credit, there's loans, and knowing when to use those capital channels and when not to use them as a small business.
Outstanding, outstanding. Knowing when to use the different types of capital for the small business, I think that's paramount, Kelsey. I want to switch over to Charles once again and ask you, Charles, what are some of the outcomes and success stories that you're seeing as it relates to supporting and growing the Black-owned business as a result of what the U.S. Black Chambers Incorporated and the Texas, what you're doing?
Well, primary among them for our organizational, from an organizational perspective, 11, 12-year-old organization that now has 152 chambers in 42 states, I think is a monumental achievement. That is to get together. This is Black folk we're talking about now, a bunch of Black folk committed to business at the same level across the country in a very short time period, I think is an outstanding example of debunking this old saw that we don't work together. We actually do work together. We work together very well. There are 30 Black chambers operating in the state of Texas, so we have the same thing. We've been doing this business for 37 years in the state of Texas. And so the things that we've been able to do is deliver Black Business Day at the Capitol, both here in Austin and in Washington, D.C. Making business owners understand how policy, that is legislative policy, impacts their enterprises or their ability to access markets. Again, most recently, the SBA extended the time period allowed to stay in the 8A program as a direct result of the USBC's advocacy. Fast pay, federal government fast pay. You know, if you do your business and you don't get paid for 6 months, very likely when the check gets there, you're already out of business. And so quick pay, fast pay has been implemented in a number of federal agencies expressly because of the work that we do in Texas. Again, back to the founding of our organization, the state of Texas had no interest at all in spending money with Black-owned businesses. And now, as a result of course, Black-owned businesses and our state legislators created what they call the historically underutilized business program, just expressly to increase utilization for awarding contracts to Black-owned businesses. I want to just really quickly, Gigi, just back to this mind shift, this paradigm shift in the way we approach the marketplace. If we accept that a fundamental tenet of capitalism is controlling the means of production, that means that we have to look at business enterprises in a very, very different way. And we're fortunate in that since we didn't get in this shape overnight, we probably won't work our way through it overnight, but it's going to require us taking a look at our interest in our presence in service industries, our interest in professional industries, but none of those are production necessarily. Those are providing services or selling goods, retailing goods. And so for communities that have been craftsmen, workmen, providing labor to now have to interact with an economy that does not require labor, makes us have to think about this economy in a very, very different way. And so, again, I believe that organizations like a USBC and USB and an attack are able to frame what those new realities will be so that we can guide business owners to where the next opportunities are going to be, rather than them coming my last thing is both Kelsey and Mr. Combs addressed this, I believe. Far too often we find business owners or those aspiring to business entering the workforce or the economy from the perspective of a consumer. And that's a very different perspective than that is of a business owner. And because we've not had historically experience as business owners, as Mr. Ruger noted. And so, again, organizations like those that I'm associated with, I think are absolutely critical to framing, again, this new approach to the marketplace and ensuring that Black businesses are viable into the future.
Awesome. Awesome. Kelsey, give us a success story for Hello Alice.
Well, we have a lot of them. And I'd say, so over the last 2 years, we've awarded just under $10 million in grants to Black businesses. But I think beyond that, being able to do that for them and to help them sustain through the pandemic, it actually allowed us to put faces to data, because we as a company gather a lot of data, but in the course of looking at all of these grant applications, you learn a lot about who the real people are and why they do what they do. And you find out a lot of people who are, they are helping their community in a certain way. And they are, sort of the bridge for a lot of people in that community to get access to certain products, especially if you look at things like small groceries, right? And being able to put a grocery store in a neighborhood where there's no other grocery store around, and that becomes a source for the community. So I think, the money and then meeting the people, but also for me, it's really starting to uncover the truth about small businesses that are Black owned, because I think there's a lot of stereotypes that people will throw out there. And we just talked about, like, we don't like to work with each other. Well, that's not true, because you see it. You see that we will buy from our businesses if they're in our communities. And I think one of the things that I'm proudest of about Hello Alice is we help dispel some of those myths about who can and cannot succeed in business and who is and is not worthy of the funding that it requires to start a business. And we see this in a lot of other areas, but I think that's probably the achievement that I'm most proud of as well.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So, Sam, I'm going to ask you to do something for free. Any new business owner can struggle with how to prepare themselves to attract investors, right? And how to get approved by lenders. They may often not have it in their plan or in their budget, and we talked a little bit about that previously, to hire consultants or other advisors to help them get ready for that next step in their growth. So for those who might be listening today, Sam, what free advice could you share, or gratis advice could you share on the top 2 to 3 things Black founders should focus on to be successful in today's marketplace? Top 2 or 3.
Yeah, I would say, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on those customers, and too often it's like a revolving door. You should care. You should think about it constantly, about retention of customers and retention of your good help. And I emphasize good help and knowing the difference, and maybe even with customers, there are times when we have to fire customers. You want to keep the good customers. And so that's not just Black businesses that are guilty of that. A lot of small businesses don't pay attention to that aspect of it, and they are continually chasing new business. That's the most expensive type of growth you can have. Yep. So the best customer you get is the customer you keep. So think about it like that. Some of the other things that I would share with you for our small businesses and for individuals, as Black people, we need to try to understand and be prepared for economic cycles in a better way. Now we hear the drum beats, and by the way, Charles, I want to commend you guys and both you and Kelsey for the work you do. Before I forget, is vitally important. And anytime we can bring our organizations and people together for collective action,
Yes.
we're more powerful, in my opinion. And so, but back to that economic cycle, you know, we have gone through, gosh, over the last 8 to now 10 years, the Great Recession of 2008. So that's going to be longer than 8 years, isn't it? It's going to be, yeah, about 8 to 12 years, through a cycle of what I would call an abnormal cycle of plenty. And it was kind of a hybrid with the pandemic, which restricted movement. Yet, as Kelsey indicated, we saw the trillions of dollars injected into the economy, which provided the opportunity for all businesses and people who needed repair of their balance sheets to repair their balance sheet. And from an individual standpoint, I mean your credit and things of that nature, and your bank account, to build some savings, to build some resiliency. There will be another economic cycle. We're seeing the early stages of it now, whether it will turn into a full-blown recession. And for those of us who don't keep up with all the definitions of these economic terms, you don't need a PhD to do this. It's just the economy is potentially going to contract. It's slowing down. So what does that mean? And for Black people, we have gone through cycles where we have done well under, for example, certain administrations, only to have those gains clawed back under other administrations, and back and forth. And so for us to close this wealth gap, this business gap, we're going to have to do a better job of being more resilient through these economic cycles. So in this coming environment, while we are drinking from the horn of plenty, meaning just about everyone you know, I would guess, that wants a job today has a job. And I see just in the panel, most of us nodding our heads. That's true. And so it's the best of times. Yet people will say inflation is high. Yes, inflation's high, but wages are higher than they've been over the last 30-something years. So which one do you want? You know, you want, I guess we want the best of both worlds. You know, we want cheap stuff and better wages, more pay. But if I have to deal with one part of it, I would certainly want to see people working and gainfully employed with good paying jobs. So take the opportunity to upgrade your training and your job position if you can. But now's the time to start putting funds away for a rainy day, and that's for your businesses and individuals, and building up your reserves. Because if we do go into a downturn, and we should be ready for it, and to be able to plow through it. And that's probably my greatest piece of advice in this particular area for your question, Gigi.
I think that's very sage advice. Thank you for that. Heard loud and clear. Retain your good customers. It's
Yes.
cheap to keep them, right?
Yes.
And then to just prepare for the downturn.
Good employees and prepare for the downturn. And if it doesn't come, then
You're better off.
you're financially better off. And that's for individuals and businesses. And if we can, as Black businesses and Black people, do a better job of weathering these cycles, then we will not lose our gains, and we can continue to progress over time and maybe even close this gap faster.
That's
It can be done.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Fantastic advice. Now, and I want to thank you for those suggestions, by the way. I hope everyone realizes that was gratis.
Mm.
So thank you, Mr. Combs.
Okay.
I want to switch back to Charles for just a moment. And Charles, you alluded to this, but let's talk policy for just a moment. U.S. Black Chambers Incorporated and, the Texas Chambers, you all are policy advocates too for Black businesses. So we know that there are still systemic obstacles that many Black founders may face. Well, let's talk about the fight for legislation that promotes small business growth and addresses the challenges of Black businesses. What are the policies that need to be prioritized right now? What does the voting public need to know right now to help close this wealth gap and support our Black business owners?
I think my description of politics is the science that determines who gets what, when, where, and how much. And how much is what we fail to recognize, is governments are created to distribute the wealth of the governmental enterprise. You're taxed, taxes are levied, and those tax revenues are distributed out in the form of contracts for defense spending, for highways and bridges and all the stuff that we've heard about, Build Back Better, right? So here's the dilemma that Black folk have experienced since we got here. We're taxed at the same rate as everyone else, but our return on our taxpayer investment is absolutely so close to zero. It's unfortunate. Texas, the state of Texas, last budget cycle spent $50 billion for goods and services, spent $300 million with Black folk. Not a small sum of money, but about 1% of the state's spending. We're 15% of the population. There are more Black people in Texas than any other state. And we got this giant gap, 1% of the spending, but 15% of the population, therefore about 15% of the state's revenue. And so without understanding the responsibility of, I call it sneak reparations. If we're able to get a return on our taxpayer investment, so our constant fight is always first, public sector spending has sustained enterprises. American Airlines started off with delivering the mail for the federal government. AT&T started off the communications link for the federal government from between the two oceans, right? Essentially, Ford Motor Company built trucks and Jeeps during the wars, right? Just about every giant enterprise in our country relied on public sector spending. We have been debarred from accessing this huge trough of money that we have a legitimate claim to. And so I believe that any effort, both at the municipal level, interacting with city councils, school boards, at the state level, at the national level, until and unless we can exact a return, an equitable return on our taxpayer investment, then all of our other efforts will be in vain, because corporations are going to follow what the government says do. And so we will see almost a one-to-one increase in spending or access to opportunity with corporations when the government that these corporations, as well as citizens, finance, change the way that they deploy or spend money with businesses. My final point on this is, and this gets, I think, to the crux of this. I often tell business owners that we Black folk cannot afford to be in business for the same reason as other folk. We have a responsibility to each other, right? Sounds crazy because we're encouraged to pursue business enterprise or business success very individualistically. But if you're in business simply to stack, as the young folks say, I'm gonna make this money, I'm gonna get this bag, blah, blah, blah. There are literally hundreds of thousands of folks who don't have the opportunity that you do. And they're left bereft, and you're stacked, and you don't know how to deploy the money that you stacked up. So you back into your consumer spending. You return all of that you've earned back into the marketplace for consumer goods, rather than deploying them effectively across this quality of life problem that exists in Black communities nationwide. So our experience is that Black business ownership has been the wellspring of civic engagement, civic involvement. So business owners, because they've been successful, have the time, energy, and resources to offer themselves for public service. That's how we change how policies are created. When we show up on city council, we show up in the state legislature, we show up in the Congress, and we can talk effectively and effectively articulate the challenges that we've experienced as business owners. We can change the way that those governmental agencies respond to the needs of Black communities.
So civic engagement is paramount for Black businesses, and for those who support Black businesses. Civic engagement is paramount. Understanding what policies and what legislation may impact the very health and well-being of the Black economy, not let alone the businesses, is very important. Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I want to thank my panelists. I'm very proud of each and every one of you. Kelsey, I'm very, very excited about Hello Alice and the fantastic that your work you're doing with the NAACP and just in general. Sam, you're a point of pride, a managing director, a managing partner, a founder, an investor. You're in the big leagues. You're on Wall Street. That's pretty awesome for us. And Charles, I mean, what can I say? I so enjoy working with you and Ron Busby and the U.S. Black Chambers Incorporated. I had the pleasure of doing that. And I have to tell you that your points are very well taken. So you have 2 minutes apiece for some closing remarks. And I'm going to move quickly to those. We heard about the challenges, the strategies, the policies, and transformational programs that our communities need to support the growth of Black-owned businesses and to provide another sustainable avenue to close the racial wealth gap. So before we conclude, let's have your brief remarks. And let's start with Kelsey.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me again. I think this is an important conversation to have. And, you know, if I were going to sum up one thing, and I try to think of this in a sort of a different way, it would be build better habits. And I tell entrepreneurs that all the time and we kind of touched on this earlier with Sam, and with things like knowing when to save money and knowing when to make certain decisions. Those good businesses, I think, are the result of good habits, whether it's the way you use your money, the way you treat employees, the way you recruit. And so starting to be around people and opportunities where you can learn those habits, I think is a great foundational component for any person starting a business.
Awesome. Sam?
As I started this, and I mentioned collective action. I think the path to success for all of us as a people, as an ethnic group, to take our seat at the American table to close this $10 trillion wealth gap, which, by the way, helps to grow the American economy if Black people are able to fully participate. It's a good thing for everyone. But supporting those policies, as Charles alluded to, around economic empowerment, job and wealth creation. And so if you use those as filters, then you, as a layman, can recognize what is coming your way. The civic engagement for those of us that are able to do that, whether it's business people, business owners and the like, people who are part of these enterprises, that's where the sausage is made, if you will, and the decisions around which policies are important. And we all know what happens if you don't have a seat at the table. So yes, sometimes we have to reach in our pocket, join our chambers, and sometimes more than one chamber, black chamber, the majority chamber, but be at the table so you can influence the discussion. Participate on these boards in your communities. Be a part of the community fully. It's not a taker's game. The stakes are too high. But I'll just run through a list of things that I think that right quickly, if you'll allow me, around economic empowerment, job, and wealth creation. And we've touched on these so far, our speakers have, panelists have. The education and things around what are the structural barriers and opportunities and the key issues that confront us. We must continue to educate ourselves as a people in all forums, our institutions, our churches included. All of them must be having these conversations. So I commend the NAACP. There must be an endorsement and sponsorship of the best ideas. And we have to share the data and the research across boundaries. We want to coordinate and form alliances. So when the NAACP joins up with other African-American centered, Black centered organizations like the Black Chamber and others, I'm a former urban leaguer, and all of these institutions, there's power in that, people. And to coordinate those alliances into the greater good, that's how we come to the table with that collective actions. I talked about best practices, and as far as the policies, what's working across the country? Where are the centers of excellence? Where are the cities? Is it Kelsey's organization? Is it somewhere else? Let's talk about these, communicate, and let people know, and then let's adapt those best practices and put those to work. And then building that sustainability, I already talked about that, but I wanted to say sometimes you can co-invest and get more done. And so if I see something, I've got partners that I invest along with. That reduces the risk profile for my company. At the same time, people say, well, you know, I'm potentially cutting my potential profit. Yes, but you're cutting your potential risk, and you can spread your bets around to more areas. Plus, you've got more people studying the issue. So more heads, more minds around it. So there's an old saying that, how's it go? Hogs get fat and pigs get slaughtered. And so we have to learn not to be greedy about things, share. And that's one of the ways you build sustainability, through giving back and sharing information. And so finally, I would just say, I can't say enough about the focus on collective action. I think we have lost that somewhat, and we need to get it back, and we need to have a strategy and a game plan, and it needs to be consistent. And across our communities and our institutions, it should be fully understood. This is the game plan, and that should be communicated to each and everyone's constituencies.
And that's why everybody needs to be a member of the NAACP.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, because that's where the
Absolutely.
information, the game plan is alive. And Charles, you have 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Well, one, I think this conversation is kind of emblematic of the synergy necessary. And we got my friend Gigi, Mr. Combs and I have been on a phone call, I think a couple of years ago together. We've never met in person. Mr. Ruger is right down there in Houston. I'm here in Dallas, and he got Hey Alice, and I need to be his friend. And so we've got this thing working now. It's fixed now. Okay, so Sam and I are friends, Kelsey and I are friends, Gigi and I are friends, and that's going to start something that didn't exist before this call. That's how we'll do it. One bite at a time. We're going to eat this elephant up, right? So I thank you for the opportunity. I believe, Gigi, I'll end with some little commercial for to take care of my business here. You know, our friend Ron says, in order to have a strong black business, you got to have a strong black chamber. In order to have strong black chambers of commerce, we got to work together with organizations like the NAACP. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kelsey. And I would like to thank everyone who is joining us for this Committee on Economic Development virtual workshop. Remember, we have to build back Black, and we need strategies for growing Black wealth. Together, we can make it happen.
I'm Juan Cofield, a member of the Committee on Economic Development of the National Board. I'm a board member and president of the New England Area Conference of the NAACP, and an entrepreneur myself. My background is in business, and I so much appreciate this session this afternoon. So I want to thank you again for joining us for this virtual workshop presented by the Committee on Economic Development of the NAACP. Hopefully, we have expanded your understanding of the economic circumstance of the Black community, strengthened your resolve for advocacy, and provided a few ideas and strategies for your consideration as we collectively take actions to close this economic gap. The presenters have eloquently presented ideas which we hope you will return to your NAACP units with, discuss these ideas of what you have heard, massage the ideas, and develop a strategy that makes sense for your unit. Additionally, I want to alert you to potentially fruitful advocacy opportunities which too few units are aware of. When for-profit businesses, such as a major professional athletic team, seeks to expand their facilities and build new stadiums, arenas, and other facilities, they often seek public dollars or support for bonding authority. This is an opportunity for units to advance and to advocate for the various forms of community economic support for your local authorities. And I think we have fallen short here. I can tell you that in my region, years ago, when the New England Patriots was seeking bonding support from the state to build what now is called the Gillette Stadium, we were silent. I think we've learned a lot. That stadium has put so much money into the hands of the owners of the New England Patriots. We were silent. I'm suggesting that we have a strategy, and it continues to go on. And at the same time that we all know that there's discrimination in the back offices and in the ownership. So that's clearly an area where anytime a major business is seeking public support, public money, and bonding support, NAACP units ought to engage. Another potential fruitful advocacy opportunity exists when major banks seek to merge or acquire other banks. In most instances, these financial institutions must get approval from the U.S. Controller of the currency or the state banking commissioners in the case of state organized banks. Most of these banks will then coordinate community forums to offer greater consideration for community needs in turn for community support of that merger. All too often, our units have not been present and have not advocated for programs in strengthening the communities economically. This is a clear opportunity for economic advancement for our community. The NAACP Committee on Economic Development will work with the national staff to develop strategies and tools to assist units with this advocacy. Again, thank you for joining us for this workshop, and we hope that you will enjoy the rest of the 113th NAACP Annual Convention. We appreciate you being with us. Good.